MIT studies show there would be disaster by the mid-21st century from exhaustion of resources, pollution, or lack of food.
The population grows so large that people starve.
Pollution could so warm the earth as to create a greenhouse effect.
The time is going to come when people are going to have a rude awakening around the world where we're going to run out. It's going to come to a head sooner or later.
Around about the year 2040, 2050, civilized life as we know it on this planet
will come to a screeching halt one way or another.
By the 1970s, consensus regarding the future had become decidedly darker than it had been in previous decades. The unshakable belief in progress that defined the modern age was coming into question as the destructive effects of industrial growth and the disturbing implications of technological development could no longer be swept under the rug. It was no longer a sure thing that tomorrow would be better than today. This new pessimism, or realism, depending on your point of view, quickly made its way into the movies of the period, particularly in science fiction films that seemed to have lifted their scenarios directly from contemporaneous nonfiction books, bestsellers predicting scary days ahead. The 1972 film Z.P.G, Zero Population Growth, was partly inspired by the best-selling book The Population Bomb by frequent Tonight Show guest Paul Ehrlich.
You have to get the death rate and birth rate in balance, and there's only two ways to do it. One is to bring the birth rate down, the other is to push the death rate up.
Baby! 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 Baby!
We won't be seeing any more of these for 30 years.
Mommy! Oh, Mommy!
But the most important book of the era would have to be The Limits to Growth, a report written by a team of researchers from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. It presented the results of a 2-year study utilizing a computer simulation called World 3. The study analyzed several key factors affecting the future of the human race: population growth, food production, resource depletion, industrial output, and pollution. The results of the study were alarming. Unless government and industry transitioned to more sustainable practices, human civilization would collapse by the middle of the 21st century. The book became a global bestseller and was hotly debated. The fact that it recommended putting the brakes on economic growth led business leaders and politicians to attack it for decades.
Perhaps you remember a report published a few years back called The Limits to Growth, where all nations, even those as bountiful as our own, must learn to live with less.
20 years ago, some spoke of the limits to growth. And today we realize that growth is the friend of the environment.
Back in the 70s, Hollywood fully embraced the environmentalist message.
Hear Joan Baez sing Rejoice in the Sun and Silent Running.
Even Saturday morning kids television presented stories of ecological collapse.
For millions of years, Earth was fertile and rich. Then pollution and waste began to take their toll. Civilization fell into ruin. Ark II, a mobile storehouse of scientific knowledge, manned by a highly trained crew of young people.
2 movies from this era best exemplify this sense of impending doom: Soylent Green from 1973 and Zardoz from 1974. The events in both films are driven by the same set of real-world factors analyzed in The Limits to Growth. Together, the 2 films serve as a good before and after demonstration of things to come. Soylent Green presents a dystopian society on the brink of collapse, while Zardoz shows how a post-apocalyptic society might function. Soylent Green opens with a montage of images from the turn of the 20th century, which just so happens to match up perfectly with the MIT diagrams that also begin at the year 1900. As the montage goes on, we see technology advance and productivity increase, as well as their impact on the environment.
How can anything survive in a climate like this? A heat wave all year long.
A greenhouse effect. Everything is burning up.
Except for rich, air-conditioned elites, everybody else in Soylent Green is a sweaty mess. The electrical grid is apparently strained, as people need to provide their own power. Deforestation, urbanization, and pollution damage ecosystems worldwide, all of which has a major effect on food production.
Isn't that beautiful?
Food has grown scarce, unable to keep up with the demands of an exploding population. For the most part, this scenario hasn't quite come to pass due to advances in agricultural technology. much of it proprietary.
But with a worldwide shortage of food, we need chemicals. Without chemicals, life itself would be impossible.
World hunger actually has less to do with food production and everything to do with distribution. Zardoz provides a simplified version of this global dynamic. People known as brutals live in the mostly barren outlands and are forced to grow crops, not for their own consumption, but to feed another population known as the apathetics, who live in the elite utopian community called the Vortex. It's a good illustration of the economic relationship between the industrialized West and the global South. In Soylent Green, the ruling class still has access to the occasional steak, but the masses now live off of
delicious Soylent Green, the miracle food of high-energy plankton gathered from the oceans of the world.
Charlton Heston eventually comes to discover that plankton, like all other food sources, is nearly extinct, and that Soylent Green is made from something else entirely.
Soylent Green is made out of people.
The film does a decent job of addressing the feedback loop identified in The Limits to Growth. Increased industrial output results in more pollution. Pollution and climate change affect the food supply, which can no longer feed an exploding population, which leads to collapse. In 1972, The Limits to Growth projected that the human population would double in 35 years, which turned out to be pretty accurate. There were 3.6 billion people on the planet in 1972. By 2007, that would be 6.7 billion. We are currently at 8.2 billion. Soylent Green envisioned New York City with a population of 40 million people by the year 2022. Things didn't quite turn out this way, as New York currently has just 7.9 million people. In fact, the big concern among policymakers and business leaders today is not overpopulation, but population decline.
If people don't have more children, civilization is going to crumble.
Although global capitalism is sounding the alarm, a decrease in the birth rate after a century of exponential population growth is considered a positive sign by environmentalists. Although the film's seemingly antiquated nightmare vision, food shortages, overcrowding, collapsing infrastructure, hasn't quite arrived in the West, there are many in the global South who are experiencing this nightmare on a daily basis. And it's growing in the industrial world as well. In this regard, the film's depiction of people scoopers is still a powerful image. Unable to control the city's hungry, unwashed masses, the police and the sanitation department join forces and resort to shoveling away the surplus population. This really isn't too far removed from the way things are now. With a green light from the Supreme Court, cities throughout the U.S. are now bulldozing their surplus populations as far out of view as possible. The homeless do not serve the economy, and consequently, they're considered a drain. There's a similar population in Zardoz, the aforementioned apathetics. Without hope, they exist in a catatonic stupor, as if addicted to opioids.
That's why Zardoz made you grow crops. To feed these people. We can't support them anymore.
While Soylent Green depicts the collapse of political and economic systems, Zardoz goes long-term and offers a glimpse of the future long after civilization has already collapsed. Most of humankind still struggles to survive, and their numbers are kept in check by gun-toting religious fanatics called exterminators. The Vortex is the one oasis left on Earth, a green, fertile, gated community, inhabited and managed by a small group of elites, the Eternals, the best and the brightest, the realization of technological singularity. Conquering death, they live in an eternal paradise. The Vortex was not a scenario put forth by the MIT researchers behind The Limits to Growth. It is, however, a perfect illustration of futurist ideas currently embraced by Silicon Valley. Longtermism, for example, places supreme importance on the long-term survival of the human race. So much so that the lives of these potential people who may exist far in the future are effectively more valuable than people who are already alive today. Catastrophes like climate change and societal collapse, which The Limits to Growth authors campaigned for decades to avert, are now considered inconsequential by long-termists. Devastating in the short term, perhaps resulting in the death of billions, but ultimately surmountable. Through this line of reasoning, the best and the brightest have a greater impact on the future than a starving child in the desert. Thus, their survival must be prioritized.
We few, the rich, the powerful, the clever, cut ourselves off to guard the knowledge and treasures of civilization as the world plunged into a dark age.
The vortex is the ultimate result of this class-driven, eugenic approach, similar to the mine shafts for the elites discussed in Dr. Strangelove. The interplanetary Noah's Ark in When Worlds Collide. The off-world paradise of Elysium, far from the suffering of earthbound humankind. And of course, the Soylent Corporation's adoption of industrial cannibalism. Market solutions are truly the best solutions. Another aspect of Silicon Valley futurism that finds its form in Zardoz is transhumanism, the belief in human evolution through technology. The tabernacle, for example, is the omnipresent, all-knowing descendant of quantum computing and AI. It also seems to be located in one place.
You have me in the palm of your hand.
Much like the internet in the IT crowd.
This gen is the internet.
The Eternals can share vast amounts of knowledge instantaneously and have the ability to mind meld whenever they go to second level, the apparent successor to Elon Musk's Neuralink technology. But their most important transhumanist characteristic is that they are immortal.
Death is banished forever.
They're the culmination of the death-defying dreams of Jeff Bezos, Peter Thiel, Walt Disney, and any other mogul, alive or cryogenically preserved, who yearns for eternal life, in spite of the various mental disorders that might result from such a goofy endeavor. So, what's in store for us? On the one hand, we have the environmentalists, who foresee the possible collapse of civilization midway through the century if we fail to implement sustainable systems. And on the other hand, we've got the tech bros, who insist that even if civilization were to collapse, killing millions in the process, it won't matter that much, as long as enough brilliant people survive, constantly pushing the arguably limitless potential of technology. As with all ideas about the future, we never really know exactly what will happen until it actually happens. For the sake of our collective sanity, we do well to remember the immortal words of Yoda.
Difficult to see. Always in motion is the future.